Everyone assumes tropical water requires a tropical country, the kind that involves a 10-hour flight, a passport stamp, and questionable airport sushi. But some of the most Maldivian-looking water on the planet hides inside Britain, and not in the nice for England sense of the word. We're talking turquoise lagoons, powder white sand, and water so clear you can count the shells on the seabed from 6 feet above it. These are places where the photos look so impossibly tropical that people in the comments genuinely believe they're fake. What keeps them invisible varies from place to place. Geography explains some of it. A ferry ride that frightens anyone who panics at the word boat explains others. And one beach on this list literally disappears underwater for half the day. Near the top of this countdown sits a beach where the sand comes from crushed ancient coral. The rocks behind it are over 3 billion years old, and Condé Nast Traveller ranked it the 5th best beach on the entire planet. That beach is in Scotland. Think you know Britain's coastline, because this list gets progressively more absurd. Quick favour before we start. Subscribe now, because missing beaches like this isn't a travel mistake. It's the kind of life decision you complain about at dinner parties when you're 65. Let's get into it. Number 13. Achmelvich Beach, Scottish Highlands. The Scottish Highlands apparently decided to cosplay as the Indian Ocean, and Achmelvich Beach is the result. Sitting on the northwest coast about an hour north of Ullapool, this beach turns a shade of turquoise that short-circuits your brain when the sun comes out, which the Scottish weather treats as more of a suggestion than a commitment. White shell sand stretches toward crystal-clear water, with mountains behind you that look like they were painted by someone showing off. Roughly 42,000 visitors arrive here each year, and to put that in perspective, Brighton pulls in 10 million. While the south of England plays sardines on a pebble beach, Achmelvich sits looking like a postcard from Bora Bora with basically nobody on it. A small concrete structure from the 1950s sits near the beach, built as a one-person shelter, and now dubbed Europe's smallest castle. Whether that counts as an achievement or a cry for help is genuinely unclear. The water temperature peaks at about 13 degrees Celsius in August, which is 55 Fahrenheit. The Maldives sits at a gentle 29 degrees year-round, and that gap between looking like paradise and feeling like paradise is the entire story of this list. Number 12. Camusdarach Beach, Scottish Highlands. Scotland apparently holds a monopoly on secret tropical-looking beaches, because Camusdarach delivers the same trick a bit further south near Arisaig on the west coast. A tiny crescent of white sand faces the islands of Rum and Eigg, which sounds like a fantasy novel, but carries a real postcode. On calm days, the water turns an impossible pale blue-green, and the whole scene looks like someone photoshopped the Scottish Highlands onto a Thai island. The 1983 film Local Hero used this beach as its filming location, and that movie tells the story of a Texan oil executive who falls in love with a Scottish beach so deeply that he can't bring himself to develop it. The fictional beach was supposed to be beautiful enough to change a person's priorities, and the filmmakers picked Camusdarach. Even Hollywood agreed this beach was unreasonably gorgeous. Getting here involves a narrow, single-track road with passing places, which means spending 20 minutes playing a very polite game of chicken with oncoming camper vans. But the beach at the end of it sits almost empty, even in peak summer, and that pattern of mild inconvenience, keeping paradise quiet, repeats throughout this entire countdown. Number 11. Studland Bay and Old Harry Rocks, Dorset. The geology down in southern England gets genuinely wild, and Studland Bay proves it across a 4-mile stretch on the Isle of Purbeck. The water here turns turquoise for a reason that goes back 80 million years. White chalk from the Portsdown Chalk Formation covers the seabed, and when sunlight passes through this shallow, sheltered bay and bounces off that pale bottom, the whole thing glows like a screensaver from 2005, except it's real. Massive chalk sea stacks called Old Harry Rocks stand at the far end of the bay, marking the eastern edge of the Jurassic coast. These stacks were once connected to the Needles on the Isle of Wight through a continuous chalk ridge that eroded away after the last ice age, which means you're looking at the remains of a land bridge that existed when mammoths were still commuting. First-time visitors rarely receive one particular warning. Studland hosts Britain's most famous naturist section, a 900-metre stretch at Knoll Beach that has surprised a significant number of unsuspecting families who rounded a headland and received an unexpected education. Plan accordingly. About 1.5 million visitors arrive at Studland annually, while Bournemouth Beach in the same county attracts 11 million. Same coastline, but one has chalk turquoise water and seahorses, while the other has hen parties and questionable tattoo decisions. Studland also holds the distinction of being the only confirmed breeding site for long-snouted seahorses in the entire United Kingdom, which means that while Bournemouth installs DJ stages, this bay nurtures endangered marine life. Number 10. St Ives, Cornwall. 4 separate beaches packed into one small Cornish town earned St Ives a reputation that precedes it. Porthmeor faces the Atlantic with serious surf and the Tate Gallery literally watching from the cliff. Porthminster is a sheltered crescent that visitors consistently describe as suspiciously tropical. Porthgwydden is a tiny sun trap wedged between rocks, and Carbis Bay, just around the corner, is the sheltered turquoise cove where the G7 summit was held in 2021, which amounts to a government endorsement of the view. The data explains the chaos. St Ives has 10,756 residents and receives 760,000 annual visitors, which works out to 70 tourists per resident per year. The Town Council's official parking guide warns that verbal and physical abuse in car parks are not uncommon, so the water looks like the Caribbean, while the parking experience resembles a cage fight. The smart move involves parking at St Erth 5 miles away and taking the scenic branch line train that drops you right at the harbour. 12 minutes with gorgeous views and zero road rage. Most people still insist on trying to park a Range Rover in a space designed for a horse and cart in 1347, because human beings are human beings. Number 9. Lulworth Cove, Dorset. Back to Dorset for something that looks less like a beach and more like a geology textbook that came alive and started showing off. Lulworth Cove is an almost perfectly circular bay carved into the Jurassic coast through a specific sequence of events. The sea punched through a thin wall of tough Portland limestone, reached the softer clay behind it and scooped out a horseshoe shape over millennia. 80 million years of visible Earth history now line the cliff strata, and the whole formation ranks among the most photographed geological features in Britain. Around the corner at Stairhole, a formation called the Lulworth Crumple shows limestone layers folded into dramatic zigzag patterns by the same tectonic forces that built the Alps. Most visitors assume it's art when they see it. It's geology. Between 500,000 and 1 million people visit annually, making Lulworth the most visited site by geography students in Britain, which sounds niche, until you realise thousands of teenagers have been forcibly educated by this cliff face. But here's the thing that catches visitors off guard. Despite looking sandy from a distance, the beach is actually shingle and pebbles. The number of people who've shown up in flip-flops expecting powdery sand and instead walked across what feels like a medieval punishment remains substantial. The path from Lulworth to nearby Durdle Door carries over 200,000 people per year, making it the busiest footpath in the entire southwest of England. One path, 200,000 walkers, and apparently the British love queuing even when there's no shop at the end. But when the sun hits that sheltered horseshoe bay on a calm day, the water turns bright turquoise, and a place reachable from London in 3 hours makes the Maldives feel like a very expensive decision. Number 8. Shell Beach, Herm Island, Channel Islands. A beach in the Channel Islands might be the single most Caribbean-looking spot in all of Britain, and it sits on an island with a population of about 40 people. Shell Beach on Herm earns its name literally, because the entire beach consists of millions of crushed shells that give the sand a pale pink-white colour and turn the shallow water an almost absurd turquoise. People see photos and assume the location is somewhere near Tahiti, and the actual location is near a tax haven in the English Channel. Herm has no cars, no roads, no street lights, and no airport. The island stretches about 1.5 miles long and half a mile wide, taking roughly 20 minutes to walk across entirely. During World War II, German soldiers filmed a propaganda piece on Herm's beaches called The Invasion of the Isle of Wight, because even the Nazis agreed this beach looked too good for where it was. TripAdvisor reviews overflow with people experiencing what can only be described as geographical identity crisis, knowing intellectually they're in Britain while their eyes tell them they're in the Maldives, and their skin, which is definitely still cold, confirms they are not. Reaching Shell Beach requires getting to Guernsey first, and then taking a second ferry to Herm. And that double ferry commitment is apparently one ferry too many for most British holidaymakers, who view a second boat journey the way most people view jury duty. And now we cross into the top 7, where things start getting genuinely unbelievable. The next beach earned the title UK's Maldives across every major newspaper, and the twist is that it only exists for half the day because the rest of the time it's underwater. Number 7. Pedn Vounder, Cornwall. If one beach in Britain has earned the title of the UK's Maldives, it's this one. And not because marketers gave it that name. The internet collectively lost its mind when photos went viral. Pedn Vounder sits near the Minack Theatre on Cornwall's south coast, and on a calm, sunny day at low tide, the water here glows a shade of turquoise that shouldn't exist at this latitude. When photos first circulated widely, the most common response was that there was no way that's England. The catch is substantial. This beach almost entirely disappears at high tide, with the sand, the turquoise pools, and the whole scene vanishing underwater. Timing it wrong means scrambling down a cliff path to find nothing but waves crashing against rock, and the path itself is steep, uneven, and requires a rope-assisted descent at one section. No lifeguards, no facilities, and no safety nets in either the literal or figurative sense. A few viral clips and a breathless caption were enough to send everyone hunting for the location pin, according to one travel outlet. And that captures the Pedn Vounder phenomenon exactly. It went from a local secret to a social media sensation essentially overnight. The beach itself hasn't changed, and the tide still erases it twice a day. More people just show up now to watch it happen. Number 6. Rhossili Bay, Gower Peninsula, Wales. Named the best beach in the UK, the 3rd best in Europe, and the 9th best in the world. And it sits in Wales. Wales was probably surprised by that too. Rhossili Bay stretches 3 miles along the western tip of the Gower Peninsula, about 45 minutes from Swansea, facing west into the open Atlantic. The Gower Peninsula earned its designation as the UK's first ever area of outstanding natural beauty back in 1956, before the Cotswolds, before the Lake District, before anywhere else. Worm's Head sits at the southern end, a mile-long tidal island that looks like a sleeping dragon extending into the sea. The name comes from the Old Norse word for dragon, because Vikings saw it and apparently registered something massive and serpentine. Walking out to it is only possible during a 5-hour window around low tide, and people get cut off every year, with some dying in the attempt. One detail makes this beach cinematic beyond the turquoise water. The wreck of the Norwegian ship Helvetia, which ran aground in 1887, still pokes out of the sand at low tide. Over 130 years it's been sitting there, photographed by generations of visitors, featured in the London 2012 Olympic opening ceremony, and basically functioning as a permanent art installation that the ocean refuses to fully claim. The bay also appeared in Doctor Who, Torchwood, and those Lloyd's Bank Black Horse adverts. Nearly 400 people attempted a world record mass skinny dip here in 2011, which registers as either liberating or traumatizing, depending on your relationship with the Atlantic wind. Sea temperatures reach about 14 to 18 degrees in summer, and visitors have reported wearing sweatshirts and trousers in July. The Gower does not negotiate with your holiday expectations. Number 5. Bamburgh Beach, Northumberland. This entry will make you question everything you assumed about northern England. Bamburgh Beach sits on the Northumberland coast, about an hour north of Newcastle. A vast, wide sweep of golden sand dominated by Bamburgh Castle. That fortress has stood on a 46-metre basalt crag for over 1,400 years, and Thomas Malory identified it as Joyous Garde, Sir Lancelot's home in Arthurian legend, which means one of Britain's greatest beaches comes with a castle and a mythological backstory. 3rd best beach in the world. That was TripAdvisor's ranking for Bamburgh in 2026, ahead of beaches in the Caribbean, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific, and the village behind it has exactly 414 residents. Which magazine named it the best seaside destination in the UK for 4 consecutive years, and one TripAdvisor reviewer titled their post, "Walk on Caribbean Sands in Northumberland," before immediately adding a note about the biting northern wind. Bamburgh giveth and Bamburgh taketh away. The historical depth elevates this far beyond a beach. A 22-year-old lighthouse keeper's daughter named Grace Darling rowed out from Longstone Lighthouse in a violent storm in 1838 to rescue 9 survivors from a shipwreck, becoming Victorian Britain's greatest heroine overnight. Tuberculosis killed her just 4 years later. The castle was the first English castle to fall to cannon fire in 1464, and before that, it served as the capital of the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Northumbria. All of this sits behind a village with no traffic lights and one pub. Number 4. Barafundle Bay, Pembrokeshire, Wales. Understanding why this beach consistently beats Bondi and Copacabana in global rankings requires understanding one thing first. Getting here takes effort, and that effort is the entire point. Barafundle Bay sits on the Pembrokeshire coast in southwest Wales, managed by the National Trust with no road to the beach, no car park at the bottom, and no shuttle. The route starts at Stackpole Quay, follows the coastal path for 15 to 25 minutes, descends steep stone steps, passes through an 18th century archway, and then reveals a crescent of golden sand backed by limestone cliffs with water so clear it's been described as gleaming Caribbean blue. Among the 12 best beaches in the world in 2004, the UK's #1 beach in 2025, and Britain's best picnic spot according to Country Life, this bay holds a Google rating of 4.9 out of 5 from over 1,600 reviews. That's essentially a perfect score from people who had to hike just to leave a review. The limestone here formed 330 to 350 million years ago, when this part of Wales sat in a shallow tropical sea, which means the beach has technically been tropical before and spent about 300 million years waiting for people to notice. But here's what nobody warns you about. Zero facilities means no toilets, no bins, no cafe, and no phone signal in parts. And occasionally, the distant sound of tanks and gunfire drifts over from Castle Martin military range next door, placing the ambience somewhere between the Maldives and a war zone, a combination only Wales could deliver with a straight face. Stackpole village nearby has about 200 residents, and the beach was once private property belonging to an aristocratic family who built those stone steps. The estate now hosts the largest colony of greater horseshoe bats in Wales, nearly 10% of Britain's total population. Welsh band Gorky's Zygotic Minchi named their 1997 album after this bay, because when you find a beach this perfect, you name things after it. Number 3. Kynance Cove, Cornwall. The geology here is so unusual that it genuinely explains why this place looks like it was airlifted from another continent. Kynance Cove sits on the Lizard Peninsula in Cornwall at the most southerly point of mainland Britain, and the cliffs are serpentinite, a rare dark green and red rock that formed on the ocean floor up to 500 million years ago. That rock originated at 30 degrees south of the equator, spent 250 million years drifting north, and has been more well-travelled than most people alive today. Sunlight hitting the pale sand between dark serpentine stacks and passing through shallow, clear water turns the cove a shade of turquoise that UK hidden gems described as looking more like a Greek island than the British Atlantic. Lonely Planet called the seas here searingly blue and almost tropical in colour, and the world's 50 best beaches ranked it 48th globally in 2024, the only UK beach on their list. What makes Kynance truly dramatic is that the beach almost completely disappears at high tide. Those caves, islands, and sandy stretches go underwater and vanish. Visiting requires timing around the tide, and arriving at the wrong moment means finding a cliff with waves hitting it. No lifeguards operate here at any point in the year. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert visited by yacht in 1846, and Albert collected serpentine rock specimens that kicked off a Victorian craze for the stone. Serpentinite ended up in Hampton Court, Westminster Abbey, and Chatsworth House. A blowhole called the Devil's Bellows snorts at half tide. Wild asparagus grows on the appropriately named Asparagus Island, and the Cove has served as a filming location for Poldark, House of the Dragon, and the upcoming Harry Potter TV series. The National Trust car park fills by 11 in the morning during summer, at which point the access road simply closes. The beach disappears twice on any given day, once when the tide comes in and once when the car park fills up. Cornwall has essentially created a beach with a natural velvet rope. Number 2. Isles of Scilly. 28 miles off the tip of Cornwall sits an archipelago that has absolutely no business looking this tropical, but the Gulf Stream decided to give a tiny cluster of British islands a subtropical microclimate. And the result is extraordinary. Palm trees grow here. Over 20,000 plant species from more than 80 countries thrive in the Tresco Abbey garden. The water around these islands is Caribbean clear. The sand is white shell fragments, and the whole place exists in a bubble where Britain ends and something much warmer begins. Tresco's Pentle Bay carries the nickname English Seychelles and was recently ranked ahead of beaches in the Maldives and the Philippines in global rankings. St Martin's Great Bay was voted the best beach in the UK. Briar's Rushy Bay is a sheltered, turquoise glowing secret that most mainlanders have never heard of. About 2,200 permanent residents live on the islands, with roughly 100,000 summer visitors arriving each year. Tourism accounts for 63% of all employment, and the Council of the Isles of Scilly is England's smallest unitary authority. The Duchy of Cornwall, King Charles's estate, technically owns the place and charges annual rent for trust work of 1 daffodil per year. That's the actual rent, a single flower. The quirky facts here are genuinely world-class. Only 2 teams play in the Isles of Scilly Football League, the Garrison Gunners and the Woolpack Wanderers, and Guinness recognises it as the world's smallest affiliated league. Adidas flew in David Beckham, Steven Gerrard and Patrick Vieira to play a match in 2007. The annual Lyoness Cup awards the world's smallest trophy at 6 mm tall, and a replica sits in FIFA's World Football Museum in Zurich. And this is the best fact in this entire video. A technical state of war existed between the Netherlands and the Isles of Scilly from 1651 to 1986. 335 years without a single shot fired. The Dutch ambassador eventually visited in 1986 and signed a peace treaty, declaring it had been no great burden to be at war. That might be the most British conflict resolution in history. Getting here costs real money though. The ferry from Penzance runs about £150 return. Flights start around £120 one way, and the helicopter from Penzance costs about £130 one way. Everything on the island ships in from the mainland, so prices run significantly higher. Accommodation books out months ahead in summer, and this is not a spontaneous day trip but a commitment. Making that commitment puts you on sand that rivals the Maldives, surrounded by water that could genuinely belong in the Indian Ocean, on islands where the world's smallest football league plays every weekend, and a 335-year war ended with a handshake and a shrug. Number 1. Luskentyre Beach, Isle of Harris, Scotland. One place in the United Kingdom shouldn't exist, not geologically, not visually, and not by any reasonable standard of what a Scottish beach should look like. Luskentyre Beach sits on the west coast of the Isle of Harris in Scotland's Outer Hebrides, in a country famous for rain, whisky, and a justified suspicion of sunshine. And yet, when the conditions align with calm water, low tide, and that rare Hebridean sun, this beach produces water so turquoise, sand so white, and views so expansive that Condé Nast Traveller ranked it the 5th best beach on the entire planet. 5th on Earth, ahead of beaches in Thailand, the Caribbean and the Maldives. The colour happens because of the sand, which isn't normal sand at all. Almost entirely crushed shells and ancient coral fragments, this is calcium carbonate ground to powder by Atlantic storms over thousands of years, and it forms the foundation of macaire, a globally rare coastal habitat found almost exclusively in northwestern Scotland and Ireland. Light passes through the shallow tidal flats, hits this brilliant white seabed, and shorter blue and green wavelengths scatter back to your eyes, producing turquoise. The physics are identical to what creates tropical water, the same science operating at a very different latitude and a very different temperature. The cliffs behind Luskentyre are Lewisian gneiss, over 3 billion years old, among the oldest rocks on Earth. Sand made from ancient sea creatures, rocks older than multicellular life, and water that looks like it belongs in the Indian Ocean, all of it in Scotland. About 333,500 visitors reached the Outer Hebrides in 2024, with Harris specifically seeing roughly 67,000. The Isle of Skye, just a short ferry away, pulls in 2.2 million, and Edinburgh attracts 4.5 million. That means 33 times fewer people see Harris than Skye, despite Harris arguably having the better beach. National Geographic named the Outer Hebrides a Best of the World destination for 2025. TripAdvisor gave Luskentyre a 4.9 rating from over 1,100 reviews, and the beach ranked 7th best in Europe in 2022. Imagine standing on a beach that stretches impossibly wide at low tide. Sand so white it almost hurts your eyes. Water shifting through shades of aquamarine and jade. Mountains rising across the bay. The only sounds are wind, waves, and the occasional curlew calling from the macaire behind you. No buildings, no music, and possibly no people. Just space, colour, and a silence so complete it feels disorienting if you're used to cities. Harris has about 1,795 residents, and the population has declined nearly 50% since 1951. Tarbert, the main settlement, holds 550 people. The island Tarrensay, visible from the beach, was the setting for BBC's Castaway 2000. And Harris Tweed is still hand-woven in islanders' homes, protected by an Act of Parliament. The Lewis chessmen, those famous 12th century walrus ivory pieces, were discovered nearby, and white ponies sometimes walk along the shore. What nobody mentions until you arrive is that the water temperature peaks at 12 to 14 degrees in August, cold enough to make a grown adult produce sounds they didn't know they could make. Rainfall's about 23 days a month, even in July. Ferry bookings sell out weeks in advance. Accommodation on Harris is scarce and expensive, and there's no cafe at the beach. Sunday observance remains culturally significant, with many businesses closing. The Maldives cost comparison puts everything in perspective. A week in the Maldives from the UK runs about £1,500 to £4,000 per person, while a week exploring the Outer Hebrides costs £500 to £1,000. 1/3 to 1/5 the price for water that photographs identically, with the only difference being that one destination lets you swim comfortably while the other gives you a story about the time your body briefly forgot how to breathe. But that's the trade. And looking at the photos, seeing those colours, standing on sand that rivals anywhere on Earth for a fraction of the cost and with essentially nobody around, that might be the best deal in travel. Here's the question for the comments. Would you swim in 12-degree water if the beach looked like this, yes or no? I'm genuinely curious where people draw the line between stunning and hypothermia. If this video helped you discover a place in Britain you didn't know existed, hit the like button. Not because it changes anything meaningful, but because apparently the algorithm judges my worth based on whether strangers tap a small icon, and modern life is beautiful like that. Subscribe if you want to keep finding places like this. Think of it as travel insurance, because one day someone will suggest Benidorm for the group holiday, and you'll calmly suggest a beach ranked higher than the Maldives in Scotland. Suddenly, you're the interesting one. That's not showing off, that's strategic knowledge. See you in the next one.